Today we are going to talk about rhetorical devices and figurative language in To Kill a Mockingbird. One of the rhetorical devices that Harper Lee uses in her novel is personification. If you remember, personification is giving inanimate objects human-like qualifications. Here is an example of personification used by Harper Lee on page 12. Mr. Radley's older son lived in Pensacola. He came home at Christmas, and he was one of the few people we ever saw enter or leave the place. From the day Mr. Radley took Arthur home, people say the house died. Now, this is an example of personification because a house can't literally die, but it explains to the reader that the house, the feeling, the atmosphere around the house was never the same. It didn't have the life of a family, the joy of a family, and therefore it was as if the house was dead. Harper Lee uses personification again to describe the house. Scout says, "The house was the same, droopy and sick, but as we stared down the street, we thought we saw an inside shutter move, flick, a tiny, almost invisible movement, and the house was still." So in this example, the house is described as droopy, sick, unwell, as opposed to a house that you look at and you can see that it contains joy and laughter and happiness. Obviously, a house can't actually be sick or droopy or unwell, but this gives the reader a very clear image of the atmosphere and setting around the Radley house. One final example of personification is on page 55. The excerpt reads, "There he was returning to me. His white shirt bobbed over the back fence and slowly grew larger. He came up the back steps, latched the door behind him, and sat on his cot." So this is personifying the white shirt. It's saying the white shirt bobbed over the back fence and grew larger. We know that a white shirt can't bob over a fence and it can't grow larger. These are human qualities. These are human characteristics given to a shirt. Another rhetorical device that Harper Lee uses often is a metaphor being a comparison of two unlike objects. In this excerpt, it reads, "Then I heard Atticus cough. I held my breath. Sometimes when we made a midnight pilgrimage to the bathroom, we would find him reading." So this is comparing Scout's walk to the bathroom in the middle of the night to a pilgrimage, a religious pilgrimage, a journey, a quest for knowledge. So this is supposed to, give an image to the reader of Scout's desire to learn, Scout's journey of knowledge. Another great metaphor is when Scout is comparing Summer to Dill. She says, "I had never thought about it, but Summer was Dill by the fish pool, smoking string, Dill's eyes alive with complicated plans to make Boo Radley emerge. Summer was the swiftness with which Dill would reach up and kiss me when Jem was not looking." This is a comparison of Dill to Summer. This is the coming of age of a young girl who did not think that it felt like summer without. Another rhetorical device that Harper Lee uses is the simile. A simile is also a comparison, but it uses like or as. This one reads, "The Radley place fascinated Dill. In spite of our warnings, it drew him as the moon draws water." This is implying that Dill didn't have a choice. Just like the moon draws water and there's nothing that can be done about it, Dill was drawn to the Radley tragedy and the Radley house. Another example of a simile is ladies bathe before noon after their 3 o'clock naps, and by nightfall were like soft tea cakes with frostings of sweat and sweet talcum. So this is comparing ladies to soft tea cakes with frosting, sweet and sweet talcum. So it's giving the image that ladies were somebody you'd like to cozy up to. It's giving the motherly image, somebody who's nurturing and caring. One last example of a simile is it must have been 2 o'clock. The moon was setting and the latticework shadows were fading into fuzzy nothingness. Jem's white shirt tail dipped and bobbed like a small ghost dancing away to escape the coming morning. So this is comparing Jem's shirt to a small ghost dancing away to escape the coming morning. One of the things that makes this novel unique, and it really brings us back to the time period that it's set in, is the dialect. And the dialect is a particular form of language that is peculiar to a specific region or social group. So, for example, "You ain't sending me home, missus. I was on the verge of leaving. I done my time for this year." Another rhetorical device that Harper Lee uses is the euphemism. This is a substitution of an agreeable or inoffensive expression for one that may offend or suggest something unpleasant. For example, Mr. Radley bought cotton, which is a polite term for doing nothing. Another example of a euphemism is when Walter Cunningham Jr. is talking to Atticus, and he says, "Reason I can't pass the first grade, Mr. Finch, is that I've had to stay out every spring and help Papa with the chopping, but there's another in at the house now that's field size." So field size means there's another kid at the house that's able to help in the fields, and so he doesn't have to stay at home now, he can go to school. It is important to note here that an author also uses the elements of style to help get the setting, the tone, the atmosphere across to the reader, as well as to help a reader understand a character better. So one of these elements of style is diction. So this is through the choice of words, especially with regards to correctness, clearness, or effectiveness. Harper Lee uses diction to show the difference in the uneducated and the educated. For example, you saw how Walter Cunningham Jr. spoke, and we also see in the novel that Atticus is educated in the choice of words that Harper Lee uses for his character. So Jem and I were used to our father's last will and testament diction, and we were at all times free to interrupt Atticus for a translation when it was beyond our understanding. So this is showing the reader that Atticus, he spoke with higher level language, and he did not dumb down his language when he spoke to his children. He encouraged them to interrupt him and ask for definitions in hopes that one day they too would have a great vocabulary. I quickly want to mention 2 different types of characters. We've talked about the different types of characters that you'll find in literature during this semester so far, but I just want to quickly remind you about dynamic characters and static characters. Dynamic characters, they change throughout the story. This change is often based on events in the story. You are going to see that the children are dynamic characters. You're going to see them change throughout the story. Then there are also static characters. They do not experience change throughout a story. The character's personality is the same at the start of the story as it is at the end of the story. And you can still be a main character and be a static character, as you are going to see in To Kill a Mockingbird. Please take out a piece of paper with a pen and pencil. I want to see if you can identify the rhetorical devices used in the next quotes. The first one is, Auntie said, "I should be a ray of sunshine in my father's lonely life. I suggested that one could be a ray of sunshine in pants just as well, but Auntie said that one had to behave like a sunbeam, that I was born good but had grown progressively worse every year." Now, what rhetorical device is Harper Lee using here? Write it down and you'll check at the end. What rhetorical device does Harper Lee use here? The fruits of their industry, those that were not eaten, made the plot of ground around the cabin look like the playhouse of an insane child. How about this one? The business part of the meeting was blood-curdling. The social hour was dreary. She said no more. When Miss Maudie was angry, her brevity was icy. Something had made her deeply angry, and her gray eyes were as cold as her voice. And here's another one. Calpurnia appeared in the front door and yelled, "Lemonade time! You all get in out of that hot sun for you fry alive!" One last quotation. In the beginning, its buildings were solid, its courthouse proud, its streets graciously wide. What rhetorical device was used here? That's the end of our lesson on rhetorical devices.